By implementing Bush Forever, we can achieve the aim of keeping the bush in the city and continue to create a city that is the envy of the rest of the world. Now that's a quote in Bush Forever, Volume 1, and others have quoted other parts out of Bush Forever. Volume 1, the vision, has some fantastic statements in it, and we've heard some of those today. The vision is the creation of a conservation estate of which Perth can be justly proud, so that everyone has their own Kings Park within easy reach for present enjoyment and as a legacy of our unique quality of life to hand on to our children. That's one of the statements, and it's true. So here we are 12 years later. Bush Plan got implemented by the end of December 2000. It came out as Bush Forever. Okay, I'll go straight into Bush Forever and what it's got set out and what we're doing our report card on. It sets out policy objectives, policy measures, and a set of actions. They're very clear, they're very thorough, they're very comprehensive, and we do, as others have done today, we do commend all the officers and the government of the day for researching and preparing such an incredibly outstanding plan of action to keep Perth as the city in the bush. It really is an outstanding plan, and you know, we're very, very privileged to have this sort of standard of work. The objectives focus on protection of regionally significant bushland. The word protection appearing in 4 of the 6 policy objectives. Management is also a key word, and that appears in 2 of the objectives. But interestingly, the word protection is actually defined in Bush Forever. And I quote, "Protection is defined as all of the processes of ensuring the continued existence and viability of bushland, and may include preservation, maintenance and restoration." In other words, it includes management. What the intent of Bush Forever is that management is included. Okay, now in our report card we've got 3 categories of achieved, partially achieved and not yet achieved. It's very difficult to do these things, but you know, to get an overview, this is how we've done it. So we've got the traffic light system. Now the first set, the policy objectives. You can't see any green lights there. A lot has been achieved under Bush Forever, but there's pluses and minuses. So anyway, if we look at the yellow lights, the community aspirations for protection and management. Now the community aspirations were certainly clearly evident, as we've heard already today, in the 10 years leading up to the release of Bush Plan. Indeed, we believe it was actually community pressure that got it over the line, as it were. UBC has always been a very strong supporter of Bush Forever. But just going back a bit, in the 90s, there were a series of things that the community did and the Urban Bushland Council did. And just as an example, and I've put some of these out on the table, you can see them at afternoon tea time. June 1997, the Urban Bushland Council ran a, well, they called in basically the agencies, and we presented to Gary Wisson, who was from Environmental Protection, David Nunn from Planning, David Mitchell from CALM, Alan Hill from Water and Rivers Commission, Andrew Watson from Agriculture. We presented them with the community expectations of Perth's Bush Plan and government policy arrangements for the retention and management of urban bushland. And it's got a whole lot of recommendations in it from 14 community groups who sent in their issues, and they, you know, it was a collective effort. And guess what the first recommendation was? Statutory protection for urban bushland. We also suggested a new conservation zone in the Metropolitan Region scheme. And that hasn't happened, and you know what we've heard just in the last paper on the MRS text amendment, they're still mucking around with that. We suggested, well, there wasn't then a process for the approval of clearing. We suggested that. Anyway, there are whole sorts of things, and also what sorts of funding there should be. One of the suggestions was for a bushland levy. After Bush Forever came out, in the next decade, there were some community surveys done by Renata. I don't know if you're going to mention this. In 2007 and 2008, showed that 90% of respondents thought it to be very important to have some natural bushland in their local area. Over 80% of respondents considered the local natural bushland to be a good place for wildlife. Over 60% considered it attractive, relaxing, and that it increased the value of local property. Notably, the questionnaires were distributed to randomly selected residents living near one of 15 bushland reserves, and the response rate was 3 times the expected rate for that type of survey method. So there's no doubt that the community aspirations for protection and management were very strong, and we've recorded those as partially achieved. Now it's the conservation agencies, of course, did the right thing, but it's the lack of adequate management of sites by state and local governments which is the biggest shortfall, and this is of enduring communities concerned, the lack of management. The CAR reserve system, we've already heard about this, setting aside 10% of each heddle complex. Now, we don't actually know exactly where we're at with that, and that work looks like it's going to be done early next year from what we've heard earlier from Loretta. We do know that Karrakatta Central and South and Bassendean Central and South still don't have at least 10% protected in the Perth metro area of the coastal plain. So the failure of government to conduct the ongoing auditing of Bush Forever, which is what is supposed to have happened over the years, including individual site auditing, as stipulated, is a major issue, and it is strongly recommended that this be completed thoroughly as a priority, and we've heard that it is going to be done next year. But you know, there's a lot of back work there to catch up to find out exactly where we're at. So hence the cautionary light. The shared responsibility, there are mixed responses here, and certainly there's a huge amount being achieved by DEC, the Planning Commission, Walga, and landowners and the community and some local governments. And the Perth Biodiversity Project is an outstanding example at Walga, and we'll hear about that in the next paper. However, it's some of the government non-conservation agencies, it's the utilities who have failed to share their responsibility in protecting bush forever areas, and we'll say more about that in the policy measures. Partnerships, again, some fantastic things have been achieved, and we've heard from Kate Brown about urban nature. That's one of the most outstanding positive outcomes of Bush Forever, and that incredible amount of work by consistent officers and very good research is a really major achievement. Also, the Land for Wildlife program and the covenanting program, that helps some landholders, but there's not very much of it. Many community friends groups assist in conservation management of their reserves in partnership with their local authorities, local land managers, especially local government authorities. The caution here is that these excellent programs cover few sites and need to be greatly expanded. There's just not enough of it. So it's good stuff, but it needs to be expanded over the whole of the Bush Forever system. Also, there are no state-based incentive schemes established for private landholders that we're aware of. People can get grants, but there's no overall state-based incentive schemes. The issue of protection by 2010, it's set out in Bush Forever that was supposed to be done by 2010. Well, it hasn't been completed. It's partway there, certainly, but it's not completed, so we have to give it the red light. As of August 2012, this year, there were 101 Bush Forever areas, or parts of areas, with no management agency assigned. Also, 79 of the 287 areas, or part of areas, are privately owned. So that private ownership may not be a problem, and a lot of private owners are doing fantastic work. However, others are not. Once areas are degraded, they cannot be restored or revegetated to their former condition. It's a one-way track, and as we've heard earlier, it's much cheaper to protect and keep things in good condition. Once you let them go, you're into big money and big trouble, and you never get back to where you were in terms of quality of bushland. Whilst parks and recreation zoning provides some protection, as we've heard, it also includes football fields, and there's places, I've just heard another one, Hartfield Park, proposal to put playing fields in there. what a disaster. So, you know, it's not protecting the bushland conservation values just by being zoned parks and recreation. Overall, bush forever areas, there is no legally binding protection of bushland values per se. There's nothing that sits over the top in law that says these bushland values, you know, have legal status. Lack of active management at so many sites means a failure in protection. And the next one is really fairly similar in that if there was legally binding protection for all bush forever sites, in terms of planning, it would actually be much more certain. So let's go on to the policy measures. Okay, now there's only 4 policy measures. The first 2, yes, it happened. Bush Forever was released by government, and that was quite an effort to get it out. Anyway, it came, and you know, successive governments have taken it on. So they're very positive measures. So that really, you know, as we've heard from others, this is incredibly good achievement. Seeking to avoid adverse impacts, we had to give that the red light. Why? It's because of some of the government utilities are still proposing developments and disturbance in bush forever sites, bush forever areas. So this is contrary to the spirit of a whole of government approach. The policy measure is to seek to avoid adverse impacts, and this is not being taken seriously by some of the government landholders, and it's particularly the utilities, as well as agencies like Landcorp. So just some examples there that are real clangers. Main Road's proposal for an extension of Row 8 highway smack through the Billiar wetlands, North Lake, Bibra Lake. Okay, the road reserve's there, but it's bush forever. They should have moved it. And in the studies that were done, just after the last election, you know, there was some whole lot of money poured at doing extra studies. The consultants put forth 7 options of where the road extension could go. The purpose of it was to deliver freight into Fremantle, freight trucks. The consultant said, you know, the best option was option 7, and option 6 I think was better, but option 7 was upgrading the railway line to the south. When they did their environmental assessment, they only looked at the first 3 options, so they ignored their own technical advice. The next one, as we've already heard, the City of Armidale proposal to build a road smack through Anstey Keen dam plans. I mean, this should never have come to formally being looked at. Landcorp proposal for housing and a canal development, do you mind, in Point Perrin and Mangles Bay Marina. That beggars belief. And as somebody, Dave Mitchell, I think it was, said when all the international visitors were here for the Microbia Light conference, which I went to, they were blown away by the fact that the government could even contemplate doing canal developments right up to Lake Richmond. Right up to Lake Richmond. Unbelievable. So it'll disturb the groundwater hydrology, and the rumbles are that the government are going to push it through. Now this is government land. And one of the other proposals that's should have been knocked back is the UWA's proposal for housing development in Underwood Avenue. That's been an ongoing campaign for the last 15, how many years or more years? About that. And this state government has said yes, but the federal government, their draft decision was no. And UWA actually pulled it out overnight. It's still hanging, it still has to be approved by the federal government. So we don't really know what's happening there. Anyway, so they're all the policy measures. And then the actions were the ways that the policies would be introduced. So they're sort of more specific. Now there's 15 of these, so we've just got them on separate slides. And this first bundle of actions have all been achieved. The Bush Forever Advisory Group was only set up for a few years. That all happened. We were represented on that. And Urban Nature was set up. The Bush Forever office started, and that was very good, and it had a coordinating role and supported the other units to get going. Urban Nature, of course, set up, and that's probably one of the most outstanding initiatives, as I've said. And the Perth Biodiversity Project and the development of local biodiversity strategies, which we'll hear about shortly, That's another very significant positive achievement of Bush Forever, and the support to local government that came through, all that sort of thing. So very positive outcomes. So the whole of government, as I've said, planning being the lead agency, just that lack of whole of government approach with the utilities gives the cautionary light with that. The Bush Forever office, we've given it a cautionary note because it started really well, but it was a separate unit. It had 4 officers, including their own botanist. It meant they could actually get out and do some surveys and do a whole lot of work. But then it stopped. It got retracted into the department, and there's really only been 1 officer or 1+ officer working on things, which is really tough on those people for the last, I don't know how many years. But the Bush Forever office didn't exist for terribly long. Statement of planning policy, we have got that. Why have we given it a caution? It's not legally binding, as has been mentioned, and it took an awful long time to come out. And the fact that, you know, we still haven't got the statutory protection because it's not legally binding. So there's an awful lot of, you know, half will we, won't we stuff. The transfer of high-value sites to DEC. Again, somebody else has talked about this morning, but that process seems to have stalled. And from my understanding, the big hold-up is the lack of dollars. Obviously, if DEC are going to manage a whole lot of new sites, they need resources to do it. As we've heard from Kate, she's sort of told us the sorts of resources you need to do this job properly. And we've got the best biodiversity and the best bushland in the world. We need to look after it properly. Not bothering, it's a bit like, you know, the gallery buying the Mona Lisa and popping it on the veranda for a few years until there's room to put it in the gallery, so it can be in the sun and the wind and a bit of rain as well. That's unthinkable. And the seed funding for local biodiversity strategies, that was only 1 term, I think. It was short term. Okay, the red lights. There was supposed to be an MOU right at the beginning to formalise the interagency processes. My understanding is that that didn't actually happen, although the Bush Forever office, that was their role. So it was sort of a bit wobbly, but it has gone on. Interim protection, and we've already heard special control areas were supposed to be imposed on all Bush Forever sites, and that should have happened. That would have been a very positive outcome and would have saved a lot of heartache, and would have said, these are Bush Forever sites, these are going to be protected, and they're legally protected. The interim protection is through the plan. What was proposed was through planning legislation which sets out special control areas. It also could have been done under the Environmental Protection Act, a new regulation straight under the Act. They could have done that. And we still need that, actually, in terms of a management obligation. And indeed, we took that suggestion once again to the current Minister. Oh yes, we'll have a look at that, that's got merit, but nothing happens. Public awareness, we've heard how important it is, and certainly Bronwyn's philosophy and what she said, we fully endorse. And we do need to raise public awareness, and there needs to be a major campaign from government to do this, and needs to be well funded. At the halfway mark of implementation, the workshop that was held, there was a proposal coming out for a Bush Forever festival, and indeed the Urban Bushland Council actually got some funding direct from the WA Planning Commission for us to increase our capacity, and we trained a whole lot of people to be city bush guides. That was our part of it. We said, well, if we're going to have the public going to check out their local bushland, we need to be able to show them. And they funded that, but they didn't go ahead with the festival. And the general public awareness raising has just been non-existent after the first few years of Bush Forever. That's within the planning agency. Certainly it's happened within urban nature, but not at the sort of general public level through planning. Okay, so it is recommended that a major public awareness and ongoing education program be implemented. Our children need to be shown experience, and they need to so they can enjoy their local bushland and its values. The last one, auditing, as we've already heard, that's going to happen next year. However, this is a really important thing, and in Bush Forever, it actually states that site auditing will be an ongoing process to monitor the status of each Bush Forever site. And it was also supposed to be continuously identifying any additions that might be needed or any deletions. Deletions, you know, if we look at what's happened at the airports, we've lost great chunks out of Perth Airport and Jandakot Airport, and a lot of that's Bassendean Central and South plant community. So, you know, we have to make sure we keep up the percentages of that complex elsewhere. And there was one example of the Chiara TAFE site that be added. And in fact, the WAPC organised and agreed with Department of Housing for a land swap. It's been sitting. I don't know what's happened to it, but you know, that's a good example of a site that DEC did recommend that it could be added to Bush Forever. It's Bassendean Central and South mostly, but also has Maori habitat. Okay, so just in summing up, Bush Forever is a fantastic initiative, and it's had a huge amount of community support over the years and still has, and there's hundreds of groups out there helping at individual Bush Forever sites, or some of the, in various ways, the larger conservation organisations like the Wildflower Society and the Naturalist Club do a huge amount of work. And certainly the community expectation from, you know, a large chunk of our community is that we want to keep these areas. So our general recommendation is that given the rapid growth of Perth and the encroachment around Bush Forever sites with the resulting degradation from illegal activities and neglect, as we've seen in the Ainsty Keane case study, it is recommended that substantial state government resources be allocated to complete the implementation of Bush Forever as part of the proper provision of state infrastructure for the Perth region. This includes acquisitions and provisions for management. Now today we were hoping to have a story about the acquisition process from the WA Planning Commission, from Tim Hilliard, but that didn't happen. But the process that they are undergoing, they need a lot more funds. The Metropolitan Region Improvement Trust Fund, which is a fund for provision of infrastructure in the Perth Metro region, that needs to be allocating a lot more money to complete Bush Forever acquisitions and the initial capital works. And certainly Swan Bioplan, which is the rest of the Swan Coastal Plain, they need some sort of system for funding the studies and the reservations that have been recommended. There's an action plan in the Bush Forever which sort of covers most of the things I've said. And there's a whole lot of specific actions and so forth, and we just categorise those into achieved, partially achieved and not yet achieved, and that's what the bar graph looks like. Okay, thank you.
I think at some stage in the Forever report card we need to remember the other things like wetlands and like ecological corridors. And remember that Australia is subject to international treaties, like the Biodiversity Convention and like the Ramsar Wetland Convention.
Bush Forever includes Bush Forever sites, or Bush Forever areas as they're called, local bushlands, and local biodiversity strategies, which should be mandatory. And then the third layer of data, if you like, are the ecological linkages. Local linkages and regionally significant ecological linkages, and all those levels of protection are essential. That's the package that is Bush Forever. It's not just Bush Forever areas, it's the whole lot, and the linkages, the connections across the landscape. There's no point in a fragmented landscape of just having your reserves scattered. They've got to be linked so that fauna and flora can move. You know, you have storms. Look at Kings Park with that massive storm followed by a fire followed by the storm. The invertebrates and small birds and things need to be able to recolonise. It's absolutely essential that the linkages are put in place. And at the moment there is no statutory recognition, let alone protection, for ecological linkages. So that's a real failure, and that must be addressed if we're going to keep all these areas. They must be linked up.